Hello and welcome back to Life with Collective Purpose. And today I have Anne Lindyberg with me. And Anne is an author in the collaborative book, Journey to Authenticity. Welcome, Anne.
Hi, Julie. Thanks.
And tell us where are you located? And tell us a little bit about yourself, Anne.
Sure. I am a licensed mental health counselor in private practice in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, US. And I'm also licensed to practice as a clinical professional counselor in Illinois. And I do telehealth for people that are in Illinois. Yeah, I'm in private practice here. That's what I do.
That's great. That's awesome. And your chapter in this book is it tackles a very important topic, which is childhood trauma, and specifically some of the trauma that people experience at school. And I know that originally you were a school psychologist, and so I know you're very, very passionate about this topic. Tell us a little bit about some of the issues that happen in our schools today around bullying or things that would lead to trauma that we bring into our adult life.
Well, schools today are an outgrowth of what schools were before, which are an outgrowth of schools before that. And it's sort of the way families go. From one generation to the next, schools develop. Um, I believe, especially since, I'm a practitioner of the Satir model, and Virginia Satir she's a former school teacher, was a former school teacher who then became a therapist, then founded her model. She really realized that when people are fully themselves, when they are in their bodies and they are allowing themselves to be themselves, then they're able to listen to and respect others. And I think anytime we have bullying, whether it's between children or or between adults, because it happens frequently enough in workplaces and even in schools, unfortunately, between staff and faculty and things like that, we always have a situation where people are unable, both bully and victim, to be fully in their own essence, in their bodies, because people who are in their bodies can set a good boundary and they do it naturally. And so that's why, and I kind of stumbled into this Satir model, but it's been hugely helpful for me overcoming and healing the energy that bullying creates and created in my life. So
Yeah, it's it's very interesting that perhaps parents possibly don't understand the impact that that bullying can have, going into adulthood. I know that in your practice you deal with many of these types of issues that come through into adulthood. So you're dealing with adults that perhaps have not necessarily identified that bullying they experienced in their childhood really does influence their everyday life and ability to be fully themselves.
well, it sort of, yeah. I mean, when a person, people know when they've been involved in bullying, and sometimes it's a mystery as to whether they were the bully or the victim, and it can go back and forth. I tend to see it as a holistic and developmental thing. I don't spend much time in my practice talking about bullying at all. People don't come. I'm not your Midwest bullying specialist by any stretch, but I do feel comfortable working with it when it comes up. Sometimes it'll come up in the context of trauma, and someone will say that they want to work on their response to a certain memory that was bullying, and it's often involving shock. And so, that's where my trauma training comes in.
And what is interesting is how you have tackled that topic in the chapter of this book, around the theme of authenticity, because of course this book and all of the contributors, all the other authors are talking about their journey to authenticity, and what does it mean to live an authentic life. And as you stated earlier, one of the challenges that people have having that journey to being authentic is actually listening and recognizing that perhaps they're not fully themselves.
Yes, that's exactly the salient point. The basis of the satir model is to become more fully oneself. Life is a long journey toward becoming more fully oneself. And of course, there are going to be trips and mistakes and challenges along the way. And how will you know when you're getting there, if you don't have the not getting there to compare it to?
Mm.
I don't speak an awful lot about authenticity, but that may be because I just go directly to talking about if a person is really fully themselves. Because if they're in a coping, which is what Satir would call a survival behavioral pattern, if they're in that sort of coping, there's usually something they're not able to talk about, something they're ashamed of, something they're afraid of, something they're angry about. It has a lot of stuff inside of them, and that's where the models that I use come in.
It's it's so interesting. Every interview that I've done with the authors of this book, talking about that topic of living an authentic life, and it's very interesting. So many people they do not perhaps even acknowledge or even know that they're not being their true self, or the true potential of them as a human being, right? They are living a life, like you say, that's based on survival or with coping patterns, and maybe don't even recognize that that's happening. Do you find many people in their counseling practice, when you're counseling them, that perhaps they don't appreciate that they are in a survival or a coping pattern?
I'm pretty sure whenever any of us are in a survival stance or a coping stance, we don't know it. We pretty much always believe that we are being our best self and most authentic self. And so that's really the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
One doesn't just, accomplish something and grab the flag and say, okay, I'm authentic now. Everybody has moments of extreme authenticity, and we can drift out of that
Mm-hmm.
and everyone thinks they're authentic all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would never suggest to people that they weren't authentic. I walk with them on the journey to self-discovery, and they decide if they've been in their alignment. They decide if they have an alignment to be in, and if they don't, maybe they want to develop one. It's their choice.
I love what you say there, and that it must be so tempting. And I know in many of the relationships that I've been in the past, it's so tempting to try and blame, or try and point out to the other person, oh, you're in survival mode, or you're doing this because you're coping, or you're doing this because you're in shame. But when in your practice, you're saying that what you're doing is holding their hand on that journey, that you're not saying to people, you're not being authentic, or you are perhaps just helping them and holding their hand on the journey. Can you give us some information or some idea in terms of your practice? How do you help them on that journey?
Well, people who come to my practice come for a variety of reasons. Some come because they have a diagnosed or diagnosable mental health challenge, and they're aware of it, and they're looking for treatment that's non-pharmacological, because I don't prescribe. It's not within my license to prescribe. I do collaborate with prescribers at times, but it's not my first go-to. So, typically every instance is individual. Sometimes folks seek me out because they're having a challenge at work. They don't have a diagnosis or any interest in medication, and maybe in that case, typically they will want to pay out of pocket. They'll need to pay out of pocket because if you don't have a diagnosable condition, then your insurance in the US is not going to pay. But that's all right. The Satir model and DBR in particular are so effective that, a half a dozen to a dozen sessions can be hugely impactful for clients in any circumstance, but particularly that latter one. So it kind of depends on what the client brings me. And I ask them immediately what they're hoping for their goals, and how, and then I make some offers about how I can support them with that based on my training.
Okay, so tell our audience a little bit about DBR. What does that mean, and how does that work?
Okay, so DBR stands for Deep Brain Reorienting, and it is a sort of an extension of the original EMDR research, which I'm also trained to do, to use as an intervention. I haven't done much with it, though, since I took the DBR training in November. DBR was developed by Dr. Frank Corrigan in Argyll, Scotland. He's a psychiatrist, and Dr. Ruth Lanius in Canada is also currently doing an awful lot of research. And it's a somatic intervention. I guess what happened with Frank, and I'm going to just throw this out there, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If he sees it and says, it's not exactly what I said, Anne, but it's my understanding from the training that he kind of got the research in the late 90s, and all of the big wigs were sitting around going, what do we do with DBR? Do we launch it? Do we do more research? And he wanted to put people in fMRI machines. And so he said, well, y'all can do what you want to do, but I'm going to put people in fMRI machines. And then 15 years went by and nobody heard from him, really. He was just researching away. But what happened was he discovered things that the original EMDR research was done like CBT research and all psychological research based on behavior and observation and self-report, whereas the fMRI piece was really, really deeply observational. So he redeveloped and honed the technique and found that shock occurs before trauma, which involves emotion. And that the challenge with EMDR right now, and EMDR works for many people, it's a good intervention, but sometimes it doesn't. And what he found was that if the shock doesn't clear, the rest of the trauma doesn't clear. It's like a baby pushing out a baby. If that head doesn't come out, the head has to come out, and then you don't have to work on getting the body out. It just slips through, right? I mean, I don't know. That's a very woman-oriented but I mean, it kind of fits. So anyhow, Frank works with a lot of people. I have some consultation with Jessica Christie Sands in London and or in Worthing, and there are just a lot of folks doing it. Right now he's trying to grow it. He just won an award from the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation last year, the Cornelia B. Wilbur Award, I believe. I think DBR, because it's somatic, you sit with your eyes closed and you take only a 1-second portion of a traumatic memory, because it is somatic and quiet and internal. It's extremely compatible with the Satir model. And the protocols are so easy and they flow much better for me than the EMDR protocols did. So I'm having good experiences with it. In fact, I've had some myself in the trainings and noticed positive changes. I can get out of my own way. My housekeeping is better. My bookkeeping is better. And that's great too, because, trauma therapists are always concerned about working on their own trauma.
So I'm fascinated by this topic. So tell me how it works. How would you use DBR on somebody that's experienced childhood trauma and perhaps are not being fully themselves. So how, take us through a typical client example, just so that we can get a feel for how it works.
Okay. So sometimes someone will come in and let's just say they have a memory of being deprived or being like having a spanking or something, and they've minimized that their whole life. It's not, nobody would think this was a reportable situation. It was a spanking that occurred maybe when they were 6 or 7. But they've always felt a sense of horror or shock around it. But maybe they haven't even wanted to tell anybody that because they're embarrassed, because everybody's saying, come on, we all got spanked. What's the big deal, right? So it will take a few sessions occasionally, unless someone knows what they want, to bring that to the surface. And then what I would say to a client is say, well, what were you feeling? Well, I don't even remember why I was being spanked. I just remember being shocked. That will tell me that there's something to be cleared there. So I'll tell them about DBR. And what I would say is that what we're going to do is, I'll guide you into the process, but the salient point is you're going to take a 1-second memory right before it happened. Typically, the shock moment is right before. And they're going to be like, well, don't I have to talk about it, the whole thing and what I felt? And the answer is no, actually. We're going to take that 1-second moment, and I suggest they just put it in a bubble next to them. And then I walk them into something almost looks meditative. I'll have them close their eyes, and I'll spend 3 or 4 minutes bringing them into the where self, and then another 2 or 3 or 4 minutes bringing them into the proto self level. And that's really where DBR connects with the satir model, because the proto self corresponds to Virginia Satir's self, the life force, the essence at the core of the iceberg, the satir iceberg. And then I will just ask them to be present with, once they bring the 1-second memory into their consciousness, I will guide them and ask them to notice how they feel in the various places in their head. And then we sit and we be with their feelings for, anywhere from a half hour to 45, 50 minutes, maybe an hour, it depends. But even if the session ends before they have completely come through the process, they can usually, bring themselves to a place where they can go home in their car. I usually coach my clients to have an hour free after our session, just to take care of themselves and readjust in whatever way they feel they have to.
Wow, it's fascinating. I mean, and of course, very relevant to what we're talking about, the journey to authenticity, because those unconscious behaviors from childhood trauma really do influence us in our everyday adult life. And for so many people, they do not understand or recognize that even, like you say, something that's a very simple behavior that happened in childhood, that you're carrying that trauma and not even aware of how that trauma is affecting you in your everyday life. So how do you help people to start to identify some of those triggers that are stopping them from being truly themselves?
Well, one of the main symptoms or challenges is if a person has a startle response, has a slightly exaggerated startle response. Sometimes their friends will notice that they jump if they're surprised. That's an indicator that there's probably stuff, and that in talking gently about it, we can bring that stuff to the surface so that we can apply DBR to it. But that's basically what I do. I mean, I practice under a counseling license in both states. I'm a counselor. And so I counsel. If folks don't, they might come in and say, I want to do DBR today, or I want to try that new DBR thing today, if it's a new client. And I'll guide them into it, but they might just come in and say, I don't want to try anything new. I just want to talk to somebody, and I want to see if you'll listen to me. They don't usually say that, but that's often what they mean. And I don't blame them, because perhaps, they have a memory of not being listened to, and that is actually part of their trauma. So we just take it slow.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's incredible what you do. And I know that you're very, very passionate about it.
I am.
So how do we get hold of you? How do we work with you? Do you have a website? Tell our audience the best way to connect with you.
I do have a website. It's the name of my practice is the Midwest Center for Transformational Change, PLC. And the website is just the initials, mwcftc.com. And you can also just Google me by name, or even my name, annlindyberg.com will bring you to my website. And I work with folks in the US who are in Iowa or Illinois. The Interstate Compact has been signed, and I may be activating services in Washington State, but I'm not looking to do too many because each state has, requirements and hoops to jump through, and I want to just enough. I will work with expats if they live somewhere where counseling is minimally regulated or unregulated, or there's a language challenge for them too. And that would be, a private pay sort of situation.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, annlindyberg.com, and you can work with Anne. Even if you're an expat, we do have a very wide audience here. This book has authors from all over the world. We've interviewed people in Israel. Beth is from Israel, America, Canada, across America in different states. And yesterday or the other day, we had an interview with Sky from Peru. So we truly are worldwide, and it's wonderful, Anne, that you are available to be able to also practice with expats. So thanks for mentioning that, because that's very important for people to understand that is listening to this. We're broadcasting to an audience that is truly worldwide, on Roku TV, on Amazon Fire, on YouTube, and of course through all the social media. So if you would like to get hold of Anne, annlindyberg.com. And Anne, I'm very much looking forward to everybody reading your chapter, and for the book launch on June the 20th. June the 20th, 2024 is when this book is being launched. And we're all very excited that we'll be able to have the opportunity to read your chapter about how you can get on that authentic journey yourself. So thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.